There's an order of operations to scaling a consulting business. And I've just seen too many consultants mess up this order. And, on the one hand, get themselves into some trouble, but more commonly just delay growth.
Mhm.
Growth, I think, can happen a lot faster for consultants if they get the sequence of activities or the order of operations correct. If they're optimizing for the right things at the right time in the right orders. I thought we'd spend some time today, Kerry, talking about what is that order of operations? How do I grow my consulting professional service business as fast as I can?
Great.
I think let's start with kind of where some of the mistakes are made. Often people assume that the only way to grow a service business is to add people. And they've got that kind of in their minds right out the get-go, right? And so, all right, I want to get a little bit busy, but then, while I don't want to close that deal because I don't have enough people, right? I don't want to go too hard on marketing because I don't have enough people. I don't want to be too aggressive. We see this all the time. Oh, I don't want to put myself out there too much because I don't have the people, right? But then obviously without the revenue, you can't hire the people, right? And even with the revenue, are you prepared to hire the people? Is that like the obvious next step, or is that, uh, too soon? What do you think?
I mean, certainly I agree. And I think the other thing that we can talk about even more broadly is failing to plan for growth in a way that even considers what it is that you're focusing on. So I think, we're going to talk about the order of operations. And what I would say before we even get to the specifics of that, which we should, is think about what's most critical and why. Because I think there's this vision of just like, we must grow, we must scale, right? Like everyone's into that language. And without even considering what it means at all, right? And only thinking about, to your point, this notion of like, do I have enough resource? Do I have enough resource? Versus considering how you're going to get there in a way that is, as aggressive or quick as you want it to be, but that is checking off the boxes to make sure that you're also growing in a, I don't want to say straight line because it's not necessarily straight, but you're growing in an upward curve. Because the other thing that we see that's challenging is people that grow and then contract and grow and contract, and that creates a whole other challenge. So, yeah, I think where I'm going here, to make my long story a bit shorter, is just, I think it's also just important to think through, and that's why I think this guideline is going to be helpful to people as they consider what their growth will look like.
Yeah, grow and contract is exhausting.
Yes.
And I've been there. Right? And it wasn't, I'm not sure it ever is deliberate. I mean, sometimes it is deliberate. And I would argue to a certain extent, ours was deliberate. But the circumstances that caused it weren't deliberate, right? And so it's a really good point. I mean, ideally, you continue growing. The curve goes up and to the right, and little blips or plateaus are fine. But ideally, you don't have any major setbacks, and you don't know what the market's going to throw at you. But if you can organize yourself, and I think some of what we're going to be teaching here today is from the lessons that we learned from growing and contracting. If you can organize yourself appropriately, you can start to minimize some of the kind of self-imposed harm that might cause you to contract. There are going to be things in the marketplace that might cause you to contract that are outside your control. The last thing you want is things that were within your control to cause a contraction. So let's talk about the first objective. And I think this is pretty universal across the board. All the points we're going to make today are pretty universal in the sense of this is true if you're a solo individual consultant coming out of corporate. This is true if you're a multi 7-figure firm with 10 to 15, 20 people on staff. I think that the order of operations for growth is fundamentally the same. And the first is you want to be focusing on filling your capacity, but I want to go a little bit further beyond that. You want to get to the place where you have excess demand relative to your capacity. So you're busy, and we'll define busy in a moment. You're busy, and you actually have more demand for your services than you have capacity, right? So you have therefore a waiting list, however formal that might be, or at the very least a pipeline of people that want to work with you. You can't work with them. You're saying no to proposals. You're saying no to opportunity because you don't have the capacity. You want to get there first as quickly as possible. Why is that, Kerry?
Well, I mean, I'll talk about the why in a second, but something just popped to mind that I want to spit out before I forget is that there's almost a part A and a part B to that, right?
Mm.
There is getting busy so that you are feeding yourself, right? Paying your mortgage, doing all of those things that you need to do. And then there is getting busy doing the thing that you want to be doing. And this is something that we talk about with folks as they're starting their businesses is what you want to do as you're refining your messaging, as you're refining your positioning, is get to a place where you're narrowing the people, the focus of the people that you are working with to a point where everyone that you're working with is someone that you want to work with, right? And those, that excess demand also comes from people that you want to work with. And so I just want to add that as a bit of a nuance because I think it's, in some ways it's easy to get busy just doing all sorts of random things. And that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about getting busy and having excess demand, doing the thing, right? Delivering the solution that you most want to deliver.
Yeah. So it's almost like you get to the place where you're doing random projects for random clients and then you're busy and you have excess demand. It's a bit of a false peak, right?
Yeah.
That's a milestone. Don't get me wrong. It can be avoided too. There often is a straighter path than going there. But even if you get there, the next milestone is, okay, now shed yourself of the projects that are not aligned with your positioning. And if you don't know what that is, then that's a different problem, obviously. And really hone in on the work that you want to be doing and then get yourself to the place where you have excess demand for that kind of work.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what we're saying.
That's exactly what we're saying. And you asked me why it was important. I guess I'll go back to the question that you actually asked. And so filling your capacity, this is critical for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, the obvious, right? If you want to grow beyond just yourself, if you want to grow beyond, lower margin deals, if you want to grow in any way, and we'll talk about what growth means in a moment, you got to get to a place where there's room to grow, right? You got to get to a baseline. You've got to get to a place where you are, where you have a business, where you have the business that you're trying to build. And only from there can you expand.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny how much energy cash flow brings. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I was talking to a client yesterday, and she's got a number of really interesting opportunities on the table, and a few different conversations. And she was kind of stalling herself because she was having trouble like putting the pieces together from a positioning perspective and was almost holding herself back. And I had to give her permission to no, close those deals.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Go book the revenue. Positioning's a bigger game. Like, if you want the revenue, and in this case, she wants the revenue, she needs the revenue, go and book the revenue, get to capacity, and then we'll look at the patterns after that. Like, we'll then take a level up and look at what you signed yourself up for. But as long as, I'm not saying take on bad deals, right? Good deal, interesting work, a project you want to do, revenue that you need, close those deals by all means. And the positioning's ultimately, I think when it comes to positioning, it's important to understand it's a journey, not an event.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We want you to get narrower, more focused, more specialized, therefore more expensive over time. You're never really done, and therefore there's no end point. This is the point at which conventionally people think I need to add people. I need to add a team. I need to build a team. I need to add more headcount, right? So now I'm at capacity. I have excess demand. There are people that want to work with me. I could be closing more deals, but I don't have people that can deliver on those deals. So logically, I should hire, right, Kerry? Is that the next logical step?
It is not the next logical step. And I think it's worth stopping here to think about what do we mean when we talk about growth, right? Because you can measure it in a bunch of different ways. You can measure it by the number of people that you hire, frankly, right? I mean, there are a lot of of times where you'll talk about, well, he runs a 1,000-person organization or whatever the number might be. You can measure growth by volume of clients, right? You can measure growth by how busy you are, and you can measure growth by how much profit you're making, what your margins are. And I think what's really important here is to get clear on what growth means, because chasing growth, which is just volume, is likely not really to serve you. What you're really thinking about in this moment in time is, how do we get the sort of appropriate optimized margins so that when we do grow by volume, the amount of money that we're putting in our pockets as we move forward is also growing. And so that's really what you want to focus on here, is how profitable are the deals that you're taking on.
Case in point, I was having a chat with another client the other day, and at one point he was running a 7-figure agency and had a bunch of headcount and all this kind of stuff, and then for a variety of reasons chose to scale back into more of a solo operation, and is now taking home more money. Right? Because there's so many stories like this, that more headcount does not mean more profit, does not mean more money in the bank for the founder. It can, and I think the caution here we're advising you against is scaling an operation that isn't yet worthy of scaling. Right?
Exactly.
Where you don't have the margin to be able to justify scale. Even if you do eventually plan on adding people, that's fine. And we're not saying don't hire. We're not saying don't grow by headcount. We're saying do it at the right time when you have sufficiently optimized your margins, right? And typically at this stage that we're describing, where you're now busy, you've got a clear point of focus, and you're doing work within the scope of that focus, and there is some excess demand, typically there are tons of opportunities to grow margin, either by increasing your price with more case studies, more results, more volume. Your price should go up. That's not a static number. It should go up. Or by further refining the scope of work, because chances are everything that you deliver is not equal in terms of value. You have higher value offerings and deliverables within your projects that could stand alone as their own offers, or by restructuring your delivery in some way or streamlining there's an endless list of things you could be doing. But the question is, how can you get to the point where you have 30, 40, 50% margin on your deals as opposed to 10%? Because if that number is too low, yes, you can grow with people. And then what happens if you lose a deal? What happens if a couple of clients fall off and then all of a sudden you built the house of cards?
Yeah, I think this is an important thing to recognize as you're thinking about adding people, is that moving too quickly means you're going to be left with the angst, right? That you've created some kind of obligation where you need to now have work for them, right? And that's true if you're bringing them on as employees. It's also true to some degree, just mentally and emotionally, if you bring them on as contractors. And so you want to be in a place where, because your margins are really solid, you built yourself a bit of a buffer, right? That even if there is a bit of a dip in terms of volume, you're still making enough margin that you can sort of flex around and keep the good folks around that you want to make sure are still on your team, even during those times where there's a little bit of a maybe a softening in
And there's a
workload for
real
a short
dark
period of
side
time.
to, there's a real dark side to this idea of keeping them busy, right? Now, on the one hand, I think there's some benefit to it, right? And I know I experienced this when we first hired people and had team and employees and contractors. Like, you feel the sense of responsibility now. It's not just about me; it's about the group, the collective, and that's I think a positive thing in many respects. Is you feel the need to level up and lead this organization. And where it can go wrong, to your point, is when, I need to go drive some random deals with random clients and do some
Yeah.
random work to keep these people busy. And now all of a sudden having a team is starting to inhibit the very growth and scale that you sought to accomplish with additional team members. So in summary, the advice here is get yourself to capacity. I think there's a footnote there on capacity worth talking about. When we say capacity, we mean while keeping time aside for marketing and business development, right? Don't be burning 40, 50 hours a week of billable client time and then have no time to actually go out and get new clients, because then pretty soon you will not be at capacity, right? So get yourself the capacity and generate excess demand for your services. So you have a waiting list, a pipeline, if you will, and then start to optimize for margin, right? Grow your margin. There will be an upper limit there, right? There's a point at which like you shouldn't be further optimizing for margin. So get to a healthy margin where now you feel like you can financially sustain more headcount, then add people and grow that way. Any final comments, Kerry?
No, I think we covered it. I think this is just about, as in any, thinking about your business, being smart, right? Being methodical and really getting clear on what's important now before you move on to what you want to have, as an end game.